So when we are recording, all right. So the dual pandemics of COVID-19 and racial injustice are creating opportunities to change policies, structures, and systems that work against successful reentry within Ohio. In this session, participants will engage with presenters and surfacing strategies and advocacy efforts that can achieve a better reentry outcome for all citizens. So when we want to start this out, I have one question that was placed in the on the HOVA website that I want to ask, and I'm going to ask Tom, because you're to my left, and we always read left to right. So, so Tom, who are your local representatives who are working most avidly with the criminal justice reform?
I would have to.
Before we do that, let me do some housekeeping. Yes, introduce yourself. Introduce where you're from and what you're doing, and why you decided to participate on this panel.
I'll let Wendy and Dr. Davis go, then I'll go last.
All right. Well, then we'll ask Dr. Davis, since you're on my far right. We'll start with you. You know, just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and why you decided to get on the panel. And I will put this question up so that everyone will have it, so that when you get to that section, you can begin to dissect it.
Sure. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Zaria Davis. I serve as Senior Associate with Pretrial Justice Institute. I'm on the Advocacy and Community Engagement team. I am specifically assigned to the state of Ohio to work with the various jurisdictions around pretrial justice work as well as racial justice. We also are working with local artists in the state around art justice as it relates to pretrial. I got into this work after my own lived experience with the criminal legal system and serving in Hamilton County, which is where I reside, Cincinnati, with the bail reform committee that exists here in our county. I've been with PJI for about 1.5 years now. Really love what I do. I have an opportunity, normally pre-COVID, to travel throughout the state and work with different jurisdictions, providing educational supports to community members. And I also work with the system actors, which would be pretrial offices, probation offices, and any other systems folks that are interested. I currently facilitate our fundamentals course that we provide on our University of Pretrial, as well as local community engagement training specific to Ohio. So I felt that the work that I'm currently doing in the state was relevant as it relates to this specific panel. And so I was glad to be able to participate today in the midst of so many other things going on in our world. So the question was,
who are local representatives who are working most avidly with criminal justice reform? So do you know what are within Hamilton County or the state?
So I know in our county, one of our representatives there, as well as our Senator Cecil Thomas, I know has presented some different things, as well as we have a bail reform, as I mentioned, committee, which exists of like PJI, Ohio Justice and Policy Center. We work with our PD's office, ACLU, the local ACLU, and a host of other organizations that I don't want to try to go through all the lists, but we have been working locally to address the cash bail issue in our area because we have really high bond amounts. And we also have been advocating to see change as it relates to that specific issue. I know that there was a task force to look at Criminal Rule 46, and I know most of those organizations provided comments and Some actually served on the task force. So that wasn't necessarily through representatives, but that was through our Supreme Court justice that actually led that effort. And there were some changes, honestly, not as many as many of us would have liked to have seen with that. But I know that was a big initiative. And a lot of the things that I've been working with and talking with our local reps on, unfortunately, aren't getting too far on a state level at this point. So a lot of it is related to pretrial justice and also addressing our current situation with COVID, as far as the number of people that are in the jails and prisons. And for those people in the jail setting, do they need to actually be sitting in our jails right now? And so there's a lot of advocacy in that space. I know when COVID initially hit, there was a big push for decarcerating our jails specifically, and seeing who's eligible to get out. Since things have opened up again, as people say, I still am like, COVID still exists, but people are, we are seeing our numbers going up in the jails and they're maxing out again. So those are some of the things that we've been working with our local people in Hamilton County, as well as our state reps that are in the county to address.
Great, thank you. Wendy, so introduce yourself, where you're from, what your organization does, and what brought you to become a panelist, and then answer the question that I posed in your chat. Got that? That was a long list of assignments.
And then our webinar will be concluded. No, my name is Wendy Tarr. I'm a director of a nonprofit organization based in the Columbus area. We work in Central Ohio in a number of counties called the Vincentian Ohio Action Network. We were formed as a way to address poverty issues in the community, engaging folks that are experiencing poverty in a number of different counties and working on how we can coordinate and work together to raise leaders and be visible and be active around systemic change issues. And the issues around reentry and the criminal justice system have been kind of at the forefront of the work that we've been doing for a number of years. We have programs called Think Tanks on Poverty that are in a number of small towns and rural parts of the state. And then in the Columbus area, the program we run here is called ARCH, which stands for Accompanying Returning Citizens with Hope. So that includes not only educating, a focus on education within faith communities and engaging people with opportunities so that they can become involved in reentry work, but that also includes some advocacy. Because when people really care about an issue and they want to get involved, we really want to help people be able to meet immediate needs when those needs are really when there's gaps in the services that are being provided, but also to talk about how the system functions, and if the issues of reentry and prisons are things we want to impact, it needs to go beyond just meeting people's needs as they come out. So that's why I'm excited to be on this panel. I think there's been a number, right now it's kind of interesting. There's been a lot, I agree with Dr. Davis. I mean, a lot of the shifts because of COVID has kind of gone local to the jails and to just how we can, advocacy has been centered around a lot of things with the drug addiction and how to not only try to reduce the number of people who are being put into the system through diversion programs, but also, ways that there's been efforts to try to reduce the prison population because of COVID. And that's been not as dramatic as a lot of people would have wanted. The numbers have gone down a bit, but really not into a significant way. And so I think, I can't remember, somebody can probably tell me, I haven't been directly involved in this, but there's been the juvenile life without parole bill, just made some movement forward. I'm not sure which sponsors were on that bill, and Tommy might know, but juvenile life without parole has been something that folks have been advocating for a number of years. And so there's been some movement with that bill recently. And then I think also some things that have happened that may be worth noting is there's some folks that are working within the faith community to try to expand Ohio's Good Samaritan law, which was a law that was dealing with, if somebody overdoses and you call for medical assistance, and you're with someone while they're overdosing, you might be using drugs together, that would prevent you from being arrested, and so that medical attention can be provided to somebody in an overdose situation. There's efforts to widen that bill because it didn't, it gave immunity if you were possessing drugs, but it didn't give immunity if you had drug paraphernalia. It would give immunity if you're, calling in, but not if you were on probation, right? Or not if you had to call multiple times, after there was a limit to how many times you could get immunity. So Representative Golonsky is working on that bill with some faith community leaders, and we're interested in how to help support that. I think kind of once we get through, when we get into lame duck, there'll be a lot of things that could be moving. So it'll be an interesting time. That's my comment. You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm on mute. I keep doing that, right? So I know a couple of years ago, Wendy, you were very instrumental in working on a couple of bills. One with Tom and I, and then the other one with the criminal justice recodification. So I know that it kind of fell in our last lame duck in 2018 actually, but in 2019 it just kind of died.
Yeah.
Do you know, or are you aware of any opportunities for its revitalization and beginning to look at it in a different lens, considering some of the what can I say? Considering some of the issues that became apparent during the pandemic that were not necessarily apparent to the broader community?
Well, I think some of the changes that were being proposed within the recodification committee were really great. There was a lot of wider reaching sort of systemic shifts that would have taken place with those recommendations. The things that I'm seeing now seem to be much more incremental, or even possibly taking us backwards and needing to be sort of stopping some things that legislation that is trying to move forward that might even further criminalize different groups of folks. It's sometimes I know some folks will say, death by 1,000 cuts. It's like little things that are just flitting around, but then when you kind of put them all together, it's like it's just increasing the number, the time of folks incarcerated, because there's always new ways that you can try to enhance penalties, or on a bunch of different things, and in the totality of it, it can be not the result that a lot of us that advocate for this work would want, which is about reducing the prison population and providing more rehabilitation and services and support for folks. Sometimes that's not what so I don't know how to answer your question. Tom might know better than me about the recodification. There's a number of folks that were involved in that panel. I spent over a year working on those recommendations, and it was done in a bipartisan fashion. So those are the types of things I would hope that our state leaders would look back at, especially once we get through this election.
Tom?
Thanks, Kirsten. Yeah, first off, let me introduce myself. I'm Tom Lutke. I'm the reentry coordinator at the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council here in Toledo, Lucas County, Ohio, right up, butting right up against the state of Michigan, the great state of Michigan. I've been in this position for 5 years. I'm a local practicing attorney, mainly criminal defense. I'm also the president of the Ohio Association of Local Reentry Coalitions. Kiston is the immediate past president. We, as an association, not only are created to assist local reentry coalitions and local reentry agencies get up and get started. We offer assistance towards that, but we also monitor legislation. When even before I was in the role of president of the OALRC, I was monitoring legislation as it pertained to reentry for our own population here in Toledo. And one of our biggest representatives here, state representatives, that is focused is our former mayor, Paula Hicks Hudson. She is in a minority position in the House of Representatives, so she ascended into leadership pretty quickly. She introduced Senate Bill 1, which, you know, Wendy, as you and Kiston were talking about the recodification committee, you know, things like that have totally left my mind, you know, with everything going on with COVID and the hunkering down and focusing on how do we restart our own local initiatives amidst all these changes. I wrote it down to look into it because I quite frankly do not know where that process is. You know, working with our legislatures here, we've always tried to educate them about the resources we have on the ground and things that could make barriers for returning citizens easier. So then they go back to legislature and come up with ideas on how they can take a look at the existing laws and make changes. And I think Paula hit the ground running. She's trying to change the number of convictions that can be sealed under a motion to seal. Currently it's 5 nonviolent, non-sex related felonies, unlimited number of misdemeanor, nonviolent misdemeanors. She's trying to eliminate the cap on felonies, which could be a huge benefit to people that have really had drug-related convictions and been incarcerated over and over just because of an addiction or mental health issues. So I've been monitoring that, but quite frankly, a lot of my monitoring has fallen off the radar. But as we were sitting here getting ready to prepare, I'm thinking now's the time to really, it's so easy to advocate at the state level because we're using Zoom. I'm in Toledo, Wendy and Kiston are in Columbus. I always depended upon them to shoot over to the State House, go to meetings, you know, in-person testimony, where I was always providing written testimony because traveling 2.5 hours there, 2.5 hours back for a half hour or an hour meeting doesn't make a lot of financial sense. So, you know, it's always one of those things. Now it should be easier. You know, Kiston mentioned the past bills we worked on. We had a senator up here, Randy Gardner, who introduced the Violent Offender Registry. And boy, how many meetings did we have with him? I think I was on the phone with him every other day. And then once we wrote those final letters, he never called us back. But yeah, I mean, it's so important. And now more than ever, if we can get some movement to assist, even better is to strike now while the iron's hot.
So Tom, I'm going to start with you with the next question, since I started with Dr. Davis in the first one. So what pivots or adjustments or terminations were necessary for you to make in order to continue advocating for individuals returning to the community from incarceration?
Boy, you know, this hit us like a train. I remember sitting in the office like the week of March 6th, March 7th. And it was when the governor first started having those news conferences, and we started all going into the conference room, watching them. And then as they talked about the virus, a couple people that would come into the conference room started bringing wipes with them and wiping everything down. And we just didn't know what what was happening. And then the shutdown started happening, and we had decided before the state shut down that we were going to begin working at home the following week. And until this day today, our agency continues to operate at home, and we've been very effective at doing it. But at the same time, when the state shut down in March and April, there was nothing open. We were trying to do calls with the ODRC Office of Reentry to see how we could assist, because not only were they dealing with the serious COVID, trying to control COVID within the institution, they were dealing with how do we really assist these people when they get out, because we don't want them coming right back. It was challenging. We have a great resource up here, the Going Home to Stay program in Northwest Ohio, that we've done every month, even during a level 3 snow emergency, every month to no avail until COVID. And then we go 6 months without doing it. And last month we began starting it back up. I am kind of running with the lead on it, because our office, our APA office, they have restrictions still from the governor. So we've been taking the model that we had, working with our local coalition and hosting the event outside so people can social distance, getting people license help, getting people connected to trades or schooling and all those things that are still there. It's just been a summer. If you're coming out of prison this summer, it's probably been the worst summer of your life. So we understand that. We know we just got to get back up and dust ourselves off and kind of create new ways of helping people, because they need the help more so now than they have ever in the past. So we've pivoted to Zoom citizen circles to help people. But then it's getting the word out to the individuals coming back that how do you access these needed services, especially if you don't have internet, if you don't have a phone. It's been very challenging, but I'm hoping it doesn't get worse as we get into colder weather here. But we have to be at least mindful that it could, and then be prepared to adjust.
And so how has the justice involved population responded to these pivots? I know you mentioned that it's a matter of getting this information out. What avenues and what response are you getting?
Yeah, so we've been trying to reach out to ones that still have contact or connections. So what that means is we've been trying to use the APA officers, the parole officers here locally that have direct connection to their clients because they're on parole supervision. We've been working with the drug court, with folks that are coming out of incarceration that are involved in the drug court program, and working with the judges in municipal court. They've been referring people that they're putting on probation instead of sentencing. Some of these people would have been sentenced but for COVID. They don't want to, they might be a risk category. So they're trying to line them up with support. So those individuals are easy to get to because they have a connection, a PO, a probation officer. Whereas the ones coming out with no forms of paper, those are the ones I worry that, there's so many that are not getting the services that they used to. And there's no way to measure that because we currently don't know who's coming out and when they're coming out. But we do have a fix for that. We have a grant that we're working on data feed between ODRC, thanks to Dr. Mike Davis committing to that 2 years ago. We're creating this data feed to get all this great data so it's fed to us electronically in the future. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I heard on one of these sessions that they're going to try to put a phone in those care packages that the Medicaid plans are doing for returning citizens. That is a huge need. Phones.
Yeah.
Our gentleman that was doing the phones through, if you had benefits, you can get a free phone. Everybody calls them the Obama phone. Those kind of went away through COVID. They weren't able to do it, or they made it more restrictive. So that really hurt. Probably the worst timing for that to happen.
So Wendy, I'm going to pivot, if you will. So that's the new word. I think that will be the word of 2020 in the dictionary, even though we know it already exists, but that's going to be the new buzzword. So I'm going to pivot, if it were, to you. So what does advocacy look and feel like to you during this pandemic?
I think that some of I'm agreeing with Tom, like the state level stuff, I think feels it's like sort of floated out there because so much of the concern when the pandemic hit, I feel like was just about like the well-being of people in the institution, like the reality of what it is to have people confined, in a space that they can't distance, and that's what people are supposed to do. And there's no ability to kind of, there's limits to what could be done to manage that. And I feel like a lot of the shifting and pivoting has been, trying to figure out what can be done to advocate around that issue, as well as the needs for people to be able to communicate with their loved ones and find out the, status of their health, or, release dates and things that were changing, and people were really worried or wondering about, if they have a health condition, can they be released earlier? And so I feel like a lot of that process questions and the process aspects of everything have become much more central. I think that as well as what Tom was talking about, the reentry part itself, there's a lot of people who, it's always very difficult to find people housing and jobs. I think, but with this pandemic, it just poses, so on the reentry side, it just kind of poses all kinds of additional complications. People really need to have a place to go when they're released, and I think that, we've been trying to help folks that have been calling that are, have certain convictions that make it even more difficult. They can't get into a shelter if they have a sex offense or some other kind of offense. And so really trying to work, I think everybody's just been doing the best that they can, day in and day out with the things that kind of pop up that day and that week. And that's a bit different than how we used to think when we were following these year-long recodification committees. It's just a different moment. And I think we're all trying to figure out how to adapt to this.
All right, thanks. So, Dr. Davis, this question I specifically saved for you. So, what has the pandemic revealed about how well advocacy works or does not work within this context of criminal justice reform, or even advocating for individuals who are justice involved?
Mm-hmm. So I think that the pandemic has really brought people together. Just in my work here in Ohio, there have been, in the various jurisdictions, people working in silos for like years, right? And this situation really allowed for statewide efforts to really kick off. So there's actually it used to be monthly, now it's twice a month throughout the state called Decarcerate Ohio, where we talk about issues that are going on in our jails and prisons and what that looks like. We have representatives from, I don't know how many organizations throughout the state, as well as individual advocates who may not necessarily be affiliated with organizations. And we're looking at several different aspects of it. So alternatives to incarceration, what are some programs before they even get into the jail, like what are some things that can be done as it relates to citations, deflection, diversion programs, looking at, what's happening throughout the state, what programs are working to provide those supports. And then also looking at within the prison system, what that looks like as well. This particular group has teamed up with Just Leadership USA, which is a national organization, to address developing an emergency plan for our facilities. So when these types of things happen, what do we have in place? So previously there was nothing in place. And so the goal is to actually have a plan so that if we come across a situation or there's some, not necessarily a pandemic in this sense, but it could be a natural disaster, it could be anything, but that a plan is actually in place to be implemented. So this particular group has been actively engaged in that space. So I think that from an advocacy perspective, it's actually brought people together in a way that hadn't been done before. And what we're really trying to do is what we saw at the beginning of COVID with jails being emptied out and, you know, the consideration of release from prisons, because we didn't really see a lot of people being released that weren't already scheduled to be released. But
Right.
what does it look like to be able to utilize those practices even once COVID is over? Like once we have figured out whatever's going to happen with COVID and things resume in a way that people deem normal. I don't know what that's actually going to look like, but when are we actually going to look at these practices and say sustainable practices that we need to implement throughout the state? So our goal for this particular group is to figure out how do we support each other, because each jurisdiction kind of has different needs, right? So people in Cuyahoga may have different needs than in Franklin or Montgomery or Greene. So what does it look like for us to be able to provide support and to generate some real change? So that also looks like policy change and, you know, legislative change, and what direction do we go in? So as it relates to that particular area, I don't feel like there's been a lot of movement because I feel like we're dealing with a whole lot of other battles when it comes to funding being cut and, you know, all these other layers of things that we've been talking about as a result of the pandemic. I know so many people who are have employment issues. And so, you know, when we talk about what that piece of it looks like, it may shift a little, but from an advocacy perspective, from a community perspective, I really believe that people have been really coming together. They understand the importance of base building. So it can't just be this one group trying to do everything, but a collective role. Collective leadership is what I call it based off of my training, and really working to address specific issues that we have here in Ohio around COVID, around the health and safety of people that are being detained or incarcerated in our jails and prisons, and then really advocating to the people in power as it relates to what we want to see. And so I think it's going to be critical in this work to actually hear from the voices of people that are impacted. I think that it's great when you have people who are well-meaning and have good hearts and everything else, but if you don't actually hear from the people that are impacted by these situations, you're not going to produce the results that you really want to see. So I think that is what we're starting to see happen. You are having a lot more people who are directly impacted in these spaces speak out, a lot of storytelling, and I think that that's what's going to lead to the change that we really want to see here in the state.
Fantastic. So I think if we follow up with that, if we all do a little, no one has to do a lot, the African proverb, right? So going to go down here to Mr. Lukey. So what lessons have we learned that will influence or alter the way in which you or your organizations move forward in advocating for the justice-involved population? And I think I want to ask those questions across the board. I'm going to start with you, Tom.
You know, I think a lot of we've learned that we can do it electronically very easily. We've really had to adapt to that, and quite frankly, I'm not the best with computers, and now I have used so many platforms, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, WebEx. You get very proficient, and at a state level, this allows us to do so much more work. I remember when we met as officers of the OALRC that we'd have a meeting maybe in Dayton. You know, most of us would have to drive to, and that takes serious time to commit to, and then get your own work done back in your community. So
yes,
I think the biggest thing that has helped through COVID is our ability to work with ODRC and have bi-weekly calls with Ronnie Burks and with all the other folks in the Office of Reentry to come up with plans on how to assist people. it seems so easy in hindsight to do that, but we had never really done that before we got into COVID. So I think that has been a kind of an eye opener for at least me, that we can do a lot of work, get a lot of work done, and get a lot of plans laid by just hopping on our computer and connecting this way. I think it's even better than a phone call, because you get to see the person and almost can kind of read the person too as you have your conversations. Locally, it's just, it's been a challenge advocating under COVID, just because inaccessible offices. I remember back, I was trying to get some information. I forget which office I was calling, but every time I called the office, I got voicemails, never a live person. It was just so frustrating, because I needed to get an answer for somebody that needed a document, and you just couldn't get anything done. So I think this has helped us come up with some ideas for doing ways in doing advocating in a different format than we're used to. It doesn't have to be that handshake and that in-person conversation. It can be via a different platform, and it's okay. We've learned in our office that we thought working from home for 2 or 3 weeks, God, how do we stay busy? Now here we're going on month number 8 of working from home, and we stay busy. We've gotten 2 grants. The whole planning period's completed on them. We've did our strategic plan. Now we're working on a community corrections planning board 5-year document. So it's given us a lot of time to focus on that with little interruption. You go to the office, think about how many minutes you spend chit-chatting with everybody as you walk through the office, and then your day is gone and you've ran from meeting to meeting. And I think this has made me really productive working from home, even though I'm getting very tired of my dining room.
Wendy, what about you? What have been some lessons learned on the advocacy piece, on working with, just in general, with the work that you do with returning citizens?
Yeah. Well, I've learned that there's things that people said could never be done. And then when you, like Tom, and then you have a pandemic, and all of a sudden we can release a lot of people very quickly from jail. So that, I think that was a good lesson to learn. There are things that can be done that we've never done. We can have visits with people on probation electronically. There's ways to make some of this easier for folks, and maybe change the way our systems function. And I hope, like Dr. Davis was saying, I hope that some of the changes that have taken place, especially to reduce the jail populations, will stay around, and we can come up with additional ways to support people in ways that don't necessitate them being incarcerated in our jails. It's not often, the most productive way to deal with some of the things that people are dealing with that gets them involved in the justice system in the first place. I also think just the other things I've learned, the moment we're in, like the divisiveness, some of the actual conversations we were having before we started the webinar, I'm very concerned with, I've been positive about the potential for bipartisan cooperation on criminal justice reform. And I am feeling more nervous about the possibilities of that, the way that our parties have become so polarized and our communities have become so polarized like that. I'm hoping that we can come up with ways to help continue to move things forward that continue to educate people and can get beyond some of those that deep break in distrust that occurs that makes it very hard for the types of changes that we would need on a state level to occur. And so that's, I don't know if that's a lesson I've learned, but it's certainly kind of a moment that we're in. And there's ways that it's drawn us together. I mean, I'm in part of the group that Dr. Davis was referring to, and some of us have been able to be in much more greater communication, but I continue to be concerned about sort of the overarching, climate that we're operating in. I guess that's enough that I can say for now.
You know what, and just to tie it in with Wendy, I wonder what this lame duck session is going to bring with the new technology we're using. Lame duck is always so crazy, and Wendy, you and I went through the last one working with that violent offender registry. Things just move at lightning speed. So I'm wondering, with the new way of advocating and getting in touch with your constituents and the interest groups that are influencing the legislatures, they're gonna have so much easier access. So I'm wondering how that's gonna impact our lame duck session.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we really need to embrace. And as even you've been talking, I have mental note, Tom, I'm gonna be calling you after this call for a couple of things. I was on a conference call around housing with a federal representative, and we had agencies from all over the state, as well as people who had been housing insecure, that were all able to call in and have a really productive meeting. And you're right, it's difficult to coordinate people physically transporting themselves from all over the state. Of course, in person is still, to me, preferable, of course, but we're not able to do that in the same way. And so I think for us to be creative and see the positive side of, the moment that we have, to try to continue to do this work, I think that being able to gather people with a quick phone call like this is, you're right, really positive, and gives us the chance to talk to a lot of people that might have been harder to reach in the past.
So Dr. Davis, do you have any lessons that you or your organizations learn about working, what we can bring into our new normal, if you would, as a result of our pandemic?
I wouldn't necessarily say these are lessons that my organization learned, but I think that this is something that we stress, is that what we've learned, and Wendy touched on this, is that people don't have to be detained, right? That the majority of people that we have sitting in these jails are there because their ability to pay. And so I think that was a huge lesson that was learned across the board. And they show back up for court, right? So it's not that they somehow ran off to a foreign country, or they do show back up for court, which is why people are oftentimes detained. I think that we talked about this in different spaces, and we've learned that people who are incarcerated in our prisons, for the most part, have not been sentenced to death. And we have to look at, these situations and really come up with a plan of how we'll address health issues as well as other emergency types of situations. And then in the conversations that I've had is really how do we, and this touches on what was already said, but how do we really develop some really solid reentry plans and understanding what the needs are for people. These have been reentry. I just need people to know these have been needs. These are not new needs. None of the things that we're talking about is new, but I feel like COVID brought a lot of things to light for people who may not be in these spaces, right? So I think that's a bigger piece of it, not necessarily this is some new revelation. That's not the case. And I think also we've been able to really see and understand how these different things intersect. So how does the criminal legal system intersect with healthcare, with social services, with education? A lot of times people haven't taken the time to think about that, but I feel like for whatever reason, all of these things, it's the microscope just got enlarged, and magnifying glasses came out and everything else, and now people are like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this was happening. And it's but this has been the reality. So I think those are just some things that I would want to lift up as we're talking about this, as far as things that we don't have to go back to the way things were. You know, we don't have to go back to that space. We can move forward where we treat people as people and make sure that they have what they need to be successful as they're transitioning home, or for people to be able to actually have adequate defense if they are in the pretrial stages.
That's right.
And fantastic. So I following up on that, talking about not new revelations or anything, but you know, the pandemic exposed the nation to the economic and racial disparities within our community, and so, but are magnifying within the criminal justice system. So how receptive has your community criminal justice professional been open to having these true and honest and open, gut-wrenching discussions about disparities? So I left this questions for last because I'm hoping it's going to be spirited. So, all right, Dr. Davis.
So I'm laughing at this question. For those, hopefully everybody can see. But I think that I've said this repeatedly. I'm tired of, you know, the surface level, you know, types of answers and, you know, these good gestures and no real action. I think that people are saying what people want to hear, but I think until we actually see the true action behind it, and that's with policy changes, with legislative changes, it's just talk to me. I think that people put on a lot of song and dance for the news, or, you know, for whoever they're in front of, whatever camera they're in front of. But until there is actual, you know, system change, and we can see that reflected in the work that we're doing and the people that we're serving, I think that we aren't at that point. So in the space that I'm in, I see a lot of talk and little action.
Thank you. So, Wendy?
Yeah. And of course, it varies depending upon what part of the state you're in too, and you know what the culture is in each town and city. I mean, I think having all of this happen, and then, you know, some of these large cases that have captured everybody's attention, again, they're not new, but it's like, you know, the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, all these things, it like generates conversation like Dr. Davis is saying. But yeah, until there's actual policy change, there's been things that have been introduced, and, you know, days and weeks and months of people protesting and raising their voices, but a lot of times, and more often than not, it falls short when it comes to the policy change part. I'm grateful for some of the changes that have been made, but I think, if a pandemic wasn't enough to make our prison numbers be able to be dropped quicker, I don't know what would. And that's really disconcerting, because, you know, we've been over incarcerated. Our numbers are above 100%. We'll put more people in that prison than they were ever designed to have. And we're spending so much money on this. I would have hoped that a pandemic would be the type of quick jolting that could have made reducing that number faster, more quickly. And it hasn't been that way. They said they were going to work on it, and then the numbers that they gave were very small of who could be released. And so, I don't know. I'm generally an optimist by nature, but I just hope that we can. I want to see more than what we've seen. So.
Tom?
Yeah, policymakers are so slow to move. One, our county, Lucas, has been involved in the Safety and Justice Challenge since it began in 2016. And I always like to tout how well we've done at reducing our pretrial population. We use the PSA, Public Safety Assessment Tool, from the Arnold Foundation. We've really redid our system to really connect. We're trying to connect people now through the brief jail mental health screener to mental health services and not incarceration. So we talk about all these great things we've done, and we've done a lot of great things. The one thing that's been the biggest challenge with MacArthur is the racial disparities. We started off with a 6-to-1 racial disparity. When we started MacArthur, you're 6 times more likely if you're African American to be incarcerated in Lucas County. And we continue at that number. It's like, you know, how do we solve the underlying issue that is causing that racial disparity? And we've had a lot of conversations with elected officials, but not a lot of movement on that. So that tells a big story. I for one, get involved in a lot of organizations that are doing the positive things for connecting people that may be under-resourced, whether it's a minority community or just just an under-resourced community, connecting them to resources. We have the Northwest Ohio Homeowners Development Association. We have classes on home ownership. You go through these classes. We have lenders that will give the person a mortgage, no credit score needed. So we've developed those programs, taken this person. Home ownership gives them so much more self-worth, and it gets them on the path of getting out of poverty and being under-resourced and connecting them to employment. Fair Housing Board that I'm on, we're trying to create better understanding among landlords about the racial impact, racial disparities, and the impact it can cause by screening out based upon criminal history, and that it is a violation of fair housing law at times. So, you know, we're trying to make those little steps that we can make in the nonprofit groups that we have in our community. But, you know, getting our legislators, getting our local elected officials to really have substantive change, you know, I don't know what the answer is there, because it seems like what Dr. Davis said. We have a lot of talking going on, and unfortunately not a lot of action.
Yeah.
So
The bills that they said were their top priority for the year when they sat this legislature was Senate Bill 1 and House Bill 3, right? And they're still not passed. So, I mean, those are drug-related reforms, and trying to improve, you know, the needs of folks that are struggling with addiction. But I don't know what's going on with that. You know, that's, I don't know. But it's something that those are things that we're talking about. But if you don't have any action, it doesn't change the reality on the ground.
Seems like we lost half the year. I mean, with nothing going on, it's just because of COVID.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
So what can folks on this call do, right, to have either the honest dialogues, create, you know, community circles or safe circles, or to work within to make these action plans and these substantive, I can say that, substantive changes within the legislature? Can each one of you give me like 2 or 3 things on your top list of things that people can do? Wendy, I'm going to start with you because you're always in the middle, so we're going to start with you first. What's some takeaways for people who are energized? Because I hope that this conversation has been energizing and wanting people to get involved to make some change happen.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people are home more, and they can, the basics of making phone calls, writing letters, you know, emailing your elected officials, voting and being involved and educated about who is running for office, especially in positions that you might be less aware of, but that have major, you know, implications, like prosecutors and judges. These are very critical, pivotal players in our whole entire system. And I think that any ways that we can do to educate ourselves and educate others about folks running in those offices is really, really important. So I'll take the easy answers and make everybody else build off of some other things. But those are all pretty, you know, standard building blocks and something everybody can do.
I can go next.
All right.
I think that I think, you know, if you're just getting started in this work, it's okay to start out, you know, with just some of the, you know, I don't expect people to just get out there and just, you know, start organizing protests and, you know, and things like that. I did put in the chat box, our online community is called University of Pretrial. We have a lot of different workshops and trainings that we provide to the community, as well as there's a lot of people within our national network in different ways to get involved. I also put my email address because if people are interested in doing kind of on the ground, grassroots type of organizing or advocacy work, you can just reach out to me. And what you tell me you're interested in, I'm sure I could plug you into a group or organization here in the state. I think that everybody has a different gift, a different lane, as I call it, that they work in. And so I would just say, figure out what you're really interested in and passionate in doing, and align yourself with individuals and organizations that are working on that specific task. Also, I did also drop in there Just Leadership's initiative that Ohio is a part of, which is the Just Us campaign as it relates to developing an emergency plan for our jails and prisons. But I would say the same thing that Wendy said as far as around education, you know, making sure that you are exercising your right to vote, but also being educated in that space. So making sure that you understand the candidates, the positions, making sure that they're aligned with you, you know, you and your values. And I think that's so important, because a lot of times we go in and people just start, oh, I know that name, it sounds familiar, and they just check boxes and not necessarily know how that person may have an impact on their life at some point. And then just getting plugged in, again, plugged into things that you're specifically passionate about. There is an organization in Ohio for probably any and everything that you could imagine. And so if you just take the time to do a little research in that space, or reaching out to any of us, I'm sure we can plug you in if that's something you're interested in doing.
All right, Dr. Davis, I want you to plug me in because I'm a little jealous because Crystal Bryant got to participate in Just Leadership. And I've been talking to Patrice about participating in Just Leadership since the beginning, but I knew that I couldn't participate at this particular point in time because it was a safe space for folks who were just as involved. And now I realize that they have another arm. So I will be hitting you up because I definitely want to be on that party train. Yeah. So Tom.
We'll be hosting, I just wanted to say, we will be hopefully hosting something in the next year or so here in Ohio for Just Leadership.
Oh, keep us in the loop.
Yes, absolutely. All right, Tom,
yeah,
what are your takeaways? What can people do?
Vote, vote, vote. You have to October 5th to get registered. So make sure all your people you work with are registered. More importantly, make sure they go vote. Another thing, it's so sad here locally, we have some census tracts where we have 60% of the people that didn't fill out the census. They have to October 5th. Again, they're going to stop the census on the 5th, but if you know of anybody that hasn't completed it, please get them to complete it. And then as far as advocacy, you know, it seems so easy, and it is easy for me locally. We have a number of elected officials that sit on our CJCC board. So I know almost every elected official very well personally here. Many of them are in my cell phone. So it's so easy to pick up a phone and text our county commissioner and say, hey, I want to come talk to you about an idea, and then go do it. Then we come up with a plan on how to get it done. Oftentimes I'm walking into the elevators and you see some of you want to talk to, and they see that I see them. They're thinking, oh no, what's Tom going to want me to do now? As I approach them and propose an idea. And I've spoke to city council many times on projects we're doing, but the bigger disconnect is just state legislatures. I'm not in Columbus, and you don't see them in my building. So I've always got the updated list every 2 years of there's a list that's put out. I forget who puts it out. I don't know if it's Ohio League of Women Voters. It's a list that has every single legislature, the committees they're on, has their email, their cell phone numbers. And then you just start advocating with them, writing letters, getting your groups that you're involved with to all do a chain letter or prepare a letter for your members to sign on to and get it sent to the emails. They listen, believe me, they listen. You know, sometimes they don't listen enough, like Randy Gardner. We worked on the violent offender registry, and unfortunately, it did come to fruition. We did try to say, hey, we don't really need this. And Wendy and I at least got it watered down quite a bit with Kisten's help. It is what it is now. It's out there, but you know, we had an impact on that legislation. That would have been whole different. It had a whole different look had we not really gotten involved as we did with the senator at the time. So it's fun to do. You get lost in the moment. It puts more work on your table, on your desk. But for me, it was a lot of fun working on bills, knowing that I had a hand in how it looks today in practice.
Great. Thank you all for, I think we've got about a couple more minutes. We have about three minutes. We're going to open it up for questions, and anybody on who is participating in our audience, if they'd like to ask a question, please unmute yourself and ask away. I'll give you a couple of minutes to start formulating a question for the panel.
And I just wanted to say, I put a few different things in the chat. So I did do the general link. I'm hoping everybody on here is registered to vote, but I did do the general link for Ohio, as well as the Hamilton County Board of Election. And then I'm also a member of the All of Us or None chapter here in Greater Cincinnati, which is a grassroots organizing group led by formerly incarcerated individuals. And there's an event tomorrow from 10 to 12 regarding voting. And then we'll also have breakout sessions discussing pretrial, the state of prisons right now, and reentry. So definitely want to welcome people to join us in that conversation.
Well, I want to thank you all for a very, very informative conversation. I was hoping that we could have more of a dialogue, but I wish that we could have recorded our conversation that we had earlier prior to hitting record before everyone came on, our off-camera conversation. But I do want to leave people with this, that, you know, now that what has been known for us who have been working in this space, in the criminal justice space for years, has now bubbled up to the surface of economic and racial disparity across lines, regardless of what field you're in. We can no longer go back to the normal. Our new normal needs to be something about true substantive change to make sure that these disparities don't continue, because we cannot function, because when we all are not functioning right, when all boats are not rising, then we are less of a society than we could be. So I'm hoping that each and every one of you feel energized by the presentation and looking forward to making some really substantive change, not only for our community that is returning, because they are mothers, brothers, sisters, cousins, fathers. They are humans. They're not inmates. They're not ex-cons. They're not ex-felons. They're humans, and they have real, live, actual feelings. And we need to be able to say that there is no such thing as a throwaway society. And we are creating a group of people that we say are less than, and no one is less than. So go forth and advocate and have a fantastic weekend. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I'm on my soapbox.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good seeing you guys.
Thank you.
Don't forget to turn off the record.
Yeah.
Hey, Kirsten, before you go, was I
Hold on,
supposed to?
let me turn off the record.